is Emmanuel Kulu Jr. And Emmanuel is an African historian and the creator, author of the Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power. And then there's another one that's released. We'll talk about that. That's a part of the Black Pharaoh series now, because now you've got a second one. But anyway, Emmanuel, he spent several years researching ancient Africa and spreading the awareness of the miseducation, I know that's right, of African history. Kulu is of Cameroonian descent through his father, Emmanuel Kulu Sr. He is the founder and adjunct professor of Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. Community activist, social worker, and he's also has a deep passion for music production and writing and history. Oh man, we have a lot of things in common. And creative arts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Emmanuel Kulu Jr. Emmanuel, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I am blessed to be here with you, my brother.
Well, I know I am blessed to have you on here, and I was sharing with the audience in the 6 o'clock hour how we actually met. And we actually met on Clubhouse. My guest on last week, I actually met her on an app called Swell. It's a mini podcast app called Swell. And I actually met Emmanuel on Clubhouse. And I was sharing, Emmanuel, how in that particular room that night, we were on a room. It was called Why Does Everyone Hate Nigerians? That was the name of the room. We were in there. And they were talking about, and they had talked about various things. And I had now got in on the stage and I had said, well, all of this infighting and hatred, we need not be having that, only because we're all descended from kings and queens out of Africa. And there was this young lady on there that, when I tell you, she wound up standing out there for the most part on her own because everybody else in the room was disagreeing with her. In terms of, because she, for the most part, called anyone who makes that statement a fool. Anyone, what are the statistical odds of anyone being descended from an African king or queen? Why? And there's a piece of her argument I understood. There's no one that was saying that you could not be descended from a field worker in Africa. That's not what folks mean when they say that. But she took it literally, that the statistical odds of you being from a king or a queen was like slim to none. And that shifted the entire conversation from why does everyone hate Nigerians to that commentary. And we were on that call for a good 3 or 4 hours. I think when I hung up the phone that night, it was like 12:30 a.m. If I'm not mistaken, it was somewhere, and I had joined the call at 7:30 a.m. So I was on there for 5 hours. So in any event, Emmanuel now chimed in and gave his feedback and his expertise of what he knew. And I said, I got to get in touch with that brother, and I got to have him on the show. That's how this morning came about. So Emmanuel, again, good morning. Thank you so much for rising early and joining me.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Grand rising to everyone.
Yes, indeed. So I tell you what, first off, the other thing is, and I think we talked about it when we talked, or maybe we didn't. I don't know. I've done a lot of research in terms of my ancestry, and I see where it says your father was of Cameroonian descent.
Yes. My father is from Cameroonian descent, from the Bantu Tribe and the Mokondomo tribe, which is a part of those who live in Boya, of the Boya side of Cameroon, which is the English side of Cameroon, and we're directly descended from the Zulu tribe. If people are familiar with the Bantu speakers, they're the most traveled people in Africa, period. So they literally have spread from Central Africa all the way down into Southern Africa and even some parts of Northern Africa. So if you look at my last name, Kulu, it's just a letter difference from Zulu. So we are derived from the Zulu tribe. So.
Now, that's interesting that you brought up the fact of the naming, because naming is critical. Even the fact your first name, Emmanuel, is God be with us. God is with us. God be with us. That's what Emmanuel means. And so you're saying Kulu, in terms of, like you said, is one letter off from Zulu. So the reason that caught my eye is because, as I was saying, I've done a lot of research in terms of my ancestry, and I've used two different companies. One is African Ancestry, and the other one is Ancestry.com. And the one country that comes up between the two really strong is Cameroon. And particularly on my mom's side, that side was Cameroonian. And according to one company, my dad's side was Guinea-Bissau. And so it was like I'm a cross between. And then if you look at the other country, I have a high percentage, according to them, of Nigerian in me. So it's kind of like between Nigeria, Cameroon, Guinea-Bissau, and then a whole bunch of other, lower percentage countries. That's kind of like what makes up my ancestry. So it's interesting to talk to somebody that actually, we're not talking connected in terms of, going back generations. Your dad is from there.
Yes. And my dad really educated me on the miseducation of African history from a very young man, since a very young man. I did a history project when I was in third grade. I believe it was third grade. And we put a history project together describing a great person of great renown from history. So we did King Tut. Me and my father decided to do King Tut. And we went and grabbed us a mannequin. We got some clay. We grabbed some cardboard to make the headdress. We grabbed some spray paint to make to spray it gold, the gold. And we made it look really nice. We brought it to school, and I got a B-. And I said, well, how did I get a B-? Like we really went to the extent to make this project exclusive. And the teacher said it was historically inaccurate. That's what actually began. I watched my father debate with my teacher for a long time right after school about King Tut being a black man. And that really set a fire in me, even as a young man, to show the beautiful history of ancient Africa. When people say that we don't come from, as we spoke about the clubhouse debate there, we don't come from a line of kings or queens. Well, we have to understand that when that's being said, we're talking about we come from civilization, because it has been driven in the minds of African Americans through, which you mentioned earlier, films, through literature, that we have no history, that we just dropped here in America. And prior to that, we had no history, which is so far from the truth. So my father never allowed me to believe that. He always connected us back to ancient Egypt. In fact, there are many tribes in Egypt that consider themselves to be, tribes in Cameroon that consider themselves to be of origin of ancient Egypt and of origin of the Israelites as well. So there's just some great history there that we need to know about.
No, you're absolutely right. And I love the word. And I know Carter G. Woodson used it as well, and others, in terms of miseducation. Because you're right in terms of the reason you got that B is because that teacher was miseducated and is going to perpetuate the miseducation. And that has happened and is still happening. Matter of fact, all this nonsense that we're seeing now is a part of that miseducation. Now, some of it is, all right, I just don't know. And a lot of it is, I don't care and I don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's where, for me, the issue, when you get Rick Santorum on CNN standing there talking about, the country didn't exist before white folks or before Caucasians, and I'm paraphrasing him, but that's for the most part what he says. It's like, that's just straight up ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
And we're seeing that, even with the new statement from Tim Scott, that says the country is not racist. We're seeing a complete either ignorance or just ignoring what's actually been happening for over 400 years. When we can talk about from the education side. We can also talk about just culturally what's happened in this country. COINTELPRO, we can go to systematic racism to say that is not happening. You're either ignoring that it's happening or you're just completely ignorant.
Absolutely, because that's what I mean by in terms of, and I was saying this at the top of right before, in terms of, I don't have a problem with folks, whatever their heritage or background is. If you're Irish, be a proud Irishman. If you're German, be German. If you're Italian, be Italian. Whatever. The issue comes in when, as you just said, you're going to try to act as if or ignore the fact that we have a history too. Mm-hmm. That's where we keep running, and that's where the misinformation. I mean, they're going like this whole thing with the 1619 project now has now come to the forefront of now folks trying to take it out of curriculums. You have states that during Black History Month in February, like I believe it was Wisconsin, I think it was Wisconsin, either Utah, it was one of them, and then Florida and a couple others that actually wrote into law that parents could opt out of having their children be taught a Black history curriculum.
Yes, that is absolutely true. You see this even throughout the scholarship. Pharaoh, I went to the Cairo Museum in Egypt, and Pharaoh wrote, he was an ancient scholar of Egypt, quote-unquote scholar, but he wrote that the ancient Egyptians had Negroid features, but not Negro. Just imagine that. Just listen to that. Can you imagine Caucasian features, but not Caucasians? So these are just the things, the terminologies that were used. There was, in Egyptology, there was a creation of a new version of a Black man, which is the Hamite, which is they separate anyone with a slight straight nose or curly hair would be a Hamite, and those with woolly hair would be Negroes. So they find ways to, and they would call the Hamite a Black Caucasian, so to speak. So these are different ways to strip Africa, to strip even in the Middle East, what they call the Middle East today, of its Black origins. So it's happening all over the world, and this is what's led me to truly push the beauty of our history in the world. And I faced a lot of backlash, brother, from doing this, because when I created I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, my goal, people look at me and says, well, weren't all the pharaohs Black? Absolutely. But then again, you have to go into what Black meant in ancient Kemet, which is ancient Egypt. Ancient Black meant completion, the Pharaoh of completion. So when you look at my title of my book, it's not saying the black-skinned Pharaoh. It's saying the Pharaoh of completion, rise to power. So just little things we need to know about our history, and I did that intentionally so that can be explained, with the cover of an African man on the picture as well. So I faced a lot of hate for that. Even coming back from Egypt, that was one of the main criticisms. Stop trying to steal history and stop trying to blackwash Egypt and all of this that I faced. I mean, death threats, countless of, hate mail coming my way still to this very day. It comes from, racist scholars or people who've been miseducated through the television, through National Geographic, all of these different stations that have contributed to the miseducation of African history.
And the thing is, that's by design. It's intentional, it's conscious and subconscious, but it's by design. And as people more and more become awakened, or as they say, stay woke, but as more people begin to research and read and learn things for themselves, as opposed to just listening to a soundbite, or as I shared earlier, the woman that talked about whenever the reporter said, but ma'am, that's not true. Her pushback was, oh, yes, it is. I saw it on TV. And I'm talking, and that's the way she sounded. I mean, she sounded country bumpkin-ish. She really did. And I said, and that's exactly what you did. As I'm listening to the radio, I said, But see, that's what you do. And a lot of this is by design. Matter of fact, that night we were on the Clubhouse call, I had made the statement that our former president didn't even know that Africa was a continent. He didn't know, and they all said, and because on the Clubhouse call were folks from Africa. It wasn't. I mean, that's the beauty of Clubhouse, and in some of these that you're not limited to just here in the U.S. And that's one of the reasons I love Clubhouse, because I get a chance to connect with folks from around the world. And the folks on that call was like, what? Your president didn't know that this was a continent? No, he didn't know this was a continent. And many people don't realize that Africa is a continent, and they have all those countries within the continent, of which Egypt is one of them. And
Right.
so, and see, again, I told you all it was going to be educational, because you just educated me in terms of your word choice in the title of Black Pharaoh when it said being complete.
Mm-hmm. Yep. If you notice, you can look this up just on Google, even if you've never been to Egypt. You can look it up. You'll see, like, one of King Tut's monuments was jet black. And you'll see a lot of the pharaohs, they have themselves jet black. That doesn't particularly represent how their skin complexion was, but it does represent completion or ascended into a god form. This is how the Egyptians saw things in their day in a spiritistic way. So just wanted to throw that out there for the listeners today to understand what Black Pharaoh meant to ancient Egyptians. And when we call them Egyptians, we have to remember that they were originally called the Kemites, or ancient Kemet was what Egypt was called, the land of the blacks. And
Correct.
when they say that refers to the soil, the black soil, just take a deep dive and think about that. You have Hatshepsut, who calls herself the Black Lady, who is also in this book, I, Black Pharaoh, or Ice Power. Queen Tia refers to herself as the Black Lady as well, Kamel. So these are actual historical facts of how these people called themselves. So clearly, Kemet was describing the actual people and not the soil.
And see, there again, you were talking about a couple of minutes ago in terms of how, you've been castigated, hated, so forth and so forth, for first learning the history and sharing it. But what's interesting is, and this is the thing that's always fascinated me in terms of folks who allegedly hate us, and yet they steal from us everything that we've done and claim it was theirs. A lot of the monuments right down there in our capital, right down there in Washington, are patterned after monuments that were in Egypt or in Kemet.
Egypt, yep, the obelisk, yep. The obelisk, the Washington Monument is, one of the main ones you're referring to. Look on the back of the dollar bill. You see a pyramid right there, So ancient Egypt was the first mega civilization. So here is why ancient Egypt has been stripped from Africa, separated from Africa. Because in the early days of Egyptology, it was scholars' attempt to try to connect biblical history to Egypt. And in order to connect the Bible, they had to separate Africa from it. Because if you go back in the book of Genesis talks about Joseph and how Joseph, after he became a ruling elite in Egypt, he took Egyptian wives. His brothers took Egyptian wives. So whether Joseph was Middle Eastern or something else other than African, the Hebrew nation that lived there became mixed with the Egyptians. So that would make them Afro-Asiatic. So they would be somewhat African, or you can say half African and half whatever you want to say, but they were melanated people of color. So in order to, and the same with Moses, who married a Cushite wife as well, he also was a man of color. So in order for them to do biblical studies and connect it with Egypt, they would have to separate that, take Egypt out of Africa, because they could not allow them to have African origins, knowing what they're about to do with colonization.
Absolutely. And see, that makes perfect sense in terms of what you're saying, because I tell people all the time, if you look biblically and you see the region of the world that it was in, that's where it was. And based on the fact that that's where, those folks had to have melanin in their skin from the simple reason of that sun beating down on them like that. They had to. Not for nothing, even if you look, since you're talking Bible, if you look biblically at the description of Jesus, the description of his hair and skin, bronze, woolly. So I mean, I could see where you're saying they would try to separate that, because I just saw something and I tweeted it yesterday in terms of, once again, the archaeologists have found the oldest skull or bone structure in Africa. That's where they found it. So, and a couple of minutes ago, I was talking about the stealing, the Abu symbol or the Great Temple. The Lincoln Monument is formed after that.
Exactly.
So this is what I'm saying. When you start talking about the very monuments, like here, I'm looking at Washington, the obelisk of Kemet, and the Washington Monument, same shape.
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, there's an obelisk of Tutmosis III in New York City. So that's been taken from Egypt. So it's a lot of history that has been. And you go to the British Museum, the French museums, and you'll see nothing but a whole section of thousands of African sculptures, of African design monuments in these museums, thousands. And Africa has been big, especially the Benin state of Nigeria, has been begging for these countries to return their stolen monuments. So it's a lot of history.
No, it is. And see, and again, because of the fact that it's always suppressed, or as you said earlier, it's this notion of you don't have a history other than slavery, which is so far off the mark that it's not funny. And yet generation after generation after generation, that's all. Anytime, even, and I work in education in the school system, anytime if you talk to kids about, like, the only thing they know about is slavery or either Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks. That's about it. That's about as far as it goes if they're not talking about an athlete or an entertainer. But that's as far as if you start pushing for, and the sad part is that's not just for kids. That's many adults as well. That's about as far as it goes. And a lot of that is what we said earlier. Some of it is, okay, I just don't know. Others is just, I don't want to know and I don't care.
Right. The history that the curriculum that's being taught in the United States of America, and let's not get this mixed up. This is also being taught around the world. There are many countries in Africa. Most of the countries in Africa are also miseducated on their own history.
Correct.
Their history is not as in their books as well. Do not get that misconstrued. There are many people that I educate that are on the African continent that have no clue of the African origins, of the beginning of ancient Africa, and how it was the beginning of civilization. There are many brothers and sisters on the continent who don't know that. So their education system over there has also been colonized, just to throw that out there. But the education system starts from the 1400s on. And they look to the ancient days as ancient Greece and ancient Rome, forgetting that there was ancient Africa during and before that. Even if you look into the book of Acts, if we want to talk scriptural, there is clearly a lot of Black history even in the Bible.
Correct.
If you go in the book of Acts, the Ethiopian eunuch who met with Philip, he was reading a scroll from the book of Isaiah, if I'm not mistaken. And he was reading it out aloud. And Philip heard him. And he said, do you know the things that you're speaking? And he says, how am I to know without no one to teach me? So this was an Ethiopian eunuch. It said he was the treasurer of Candace, the Queen Candace's. Okay, if you don't know who Candace, the Candake of Nubia today, modern-day Sudan. And she was, it says, over all her treasury. So this was a wealthy man who knew about the Bible. He knew about the Torah,
right,
so to speak, because he was reading it out loud. So when people mention these things and say things as if, well, Europeans wrote the Bible, or Europe brought the Bible to Africa. No. Even if you go biblical times, this man already had a scroll, and he was already reading, and he came to Jerusalem to worship. So clearly he had already had knowledge on the history the knowledge was already being taught in where he was in Nubia or Ethiopia at that time.
Absolutely.
So,
there is a book. It's titled "The Bible is Black History." That's the title of the book, and I think it's Theron. I have to look up the author, but that's I have the book at home. It's on my shelf in my bedroom. But that's the title of the book. The Bible is Black History.
Absolutely. I really believe that you're not going to be in Egypt for 400 years and not have melanated skin complexion and working in the fields. It's just not going to happen. I think if we were to compare the differences between ancient Africans and Israelites, you can look to those in southern India. Southern Indians, those also in the Ethiopian regions of Africa today, they probably more likely resemble the ancient Hebrews. Those were, even though they have an Asiatic look, but they're still African, or connected to the African continent. But if you have someone from southern India, which are very dark-skinned people with straight, straight hair, or you can even look to the people in Australia as well, can look very similar to the ancient Hebrews. With Moses or with Joseph, if they were to shave their heads and shave their hair texture, they would look pretty much just like Africans, right? So that the notion that the dark races have done nothing great throughout history is just a lie.
It is. And that's, I think, with every breath in me, in terms of every platform I have, I try to dispel it, like in terms of with the educating of the students that I try to help them understand that. Because, see, this feeds into, and this is where the design comes in, this feeds into the self-esteem of people. If you're constantly told that you're nothing, you contributed nothing, you did nothing, after a while, just like with the big lie that's going on now, after a while, folks start believing it. And so that's why I made that commentary, and that's why folks make that commentary in terms of being descended from kings and queens. Not that we have to get down to the statistical odds or get down to, it literal. But it's to help folks understand, no, like you said earlier, you come from somebody as well. Because what we tend to do is, like you just said, we ascribe and associate everything to either Europe or something European, whether it's Greek, whether it's Roman, whether it's whatever. When the truth of the matter is, no. If anything, they traveled to us and took it back with them and claimed it. And that's still happening now.
Herodotus, Aristotle, these are Greek historians, many other Greek historians. They, Arminius, Marcellinus, they all mention Egypt as the monarch of civilization.
Correct.
I believe it was Herodotus who mentioned that the Ethiopians were Ethiopians. Again, when we mention Ethiopians in Greek, that meant the black-skinned ones or the burnt-face ones. Okay, it says they were the first of all men, and these statements were made manifest. And it also stated that the Ethiopian was the most beautiful and the mightiest of all men. So these are actually historical documents written by Greek historians at the time. I wanted to just read a quick disclaimer in my book really quick about ancient Africa and what was the purpose behind making this book, if you don't mind, brother.
By all means, please.
It says, I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph, which is the book coming out, brings to light the true African imagery of ancient Egyptians. For years, the media has perpetuated the Eurocentric belief that Egypt's origins came from Europe. Though Egypt is often mentioned as being part of the Middle East, the fact stands, Egypt resides in Africa. The author found it necessary to refer to the ancient Egyptian inscriptions and statues as the most vital proof regarding their African origins. Contrary to prior film and novel depictions, the ancient Egyptians, through immaculate art, sculpturing, depicted themselves as black, copper, and brown-skinned people. The Greco-historian Arminius Marcellinus once said, the men of Egypt are mostly brown and black with a skinny, desiccated look. There were many other notable Greek historians and philosophers who also described the ancient Egyptians as Black Africans, such as Aristotle, Herodotus, and Achilles, and many others. The ancient Egyptians also shared many practices, beliefs, and similar architectural structures as other ancient African nations such as Abyssinia, the Putins, the Nubians, the Kushites, the Magi, and later Carthage and Zululand. After the invasion of the Assyrians and Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans, many of the original ancient Egyptians fled to the Nubian regions of Egypt. They also migrated to places like modern-day Sudan, Ethiopia, South Africa, Mali, Nigeria, and Cameroon. They also found it appropriate to include the Western Standard race classification term, Black, which does not mean dark black or melanated skin complexion, but it signified completion amongst the ruling elite of the ancient Egyptian culture. The term Black in the title I, Black Pharaoh does not reference skin complexion, but represents completion, or the Pharaoh of completion. The novel by no means promotes an Afrocentric movement, racism, or race superiority. It simply restores the historical fact that the original ancient Egyptian Kemites were none other than Black African people. So I wanted to throw that out there.
No, and I'm glad, because see, this is the thing. It's one thing, where the issue comes in is, and we've said it, it's the denial or the suppression, because the facts are the facts are the facts. Archaeologists are finding what you just said. Archaeologists, regardless of their skin color or their background or their ethnicity, archaeologists are finding this out. So that's the truth. What's happening is whenever the truth gets obliterated or twisted to fit another picture. And that's what keeps happening. And that's why folks just look, okay, if you didn't know, you didn't know. But at least now say, okay, the facts are in front of me. So if that's what the facts say, if that's what the science says, if that's what the facts says, then okay. But that's not what, because for some reason there are folks that think if it's the other way, that it makes them less than what they are. When that's, the truth. Where else? It's funny that I heard you say something about Egypt being in Africa, but where else is Egypt if it's not in Africa? Because you have folks that are like, when they reference Egypt all the time, but then you say, well, you do understand Egypt is in Africa, right? They will look at you like you have three heads.
Yeah. And really why that is the 7th century migration, not even the migration, invasion of the Arab invasion. That is currently the power over the Egyptian civilization today. The Caliphate led in the 7th century an invasion into Egypt, which was far past the Pharaonic period. I mean, Egypt had been invaded several times. I mean, even when the Persians came into Egypt, Greece came, then Rome came. Then Turkey came, then France came, then the Arab invasion came. So Egypt had been far from the Pharaonic periods by the time the Arab invasion came. So if you go to Cairo, mostly you'll see more Arab-looking Egyptians, and not the actual original Egyptians who are in Aswan and also have gone down into Sudan.
And you said something interesting, too, in terms of this not only being a United States issue, but it's a worldwide issue in terms of wherever you go in the world, for whatever reason, those with dark skin, those who are African or Black or whatever, those with dark skin, no matter where in the world you go, are always the ones who are disenfranchised, for lack of a better word, always the ones who are maligned, always the ones who are hated, always, because that's why I jumped on the call that night for Clubhouse to begin with, because this is why our Nigerians hate it. And another comment I had made was, well, it's not just Nigerians, it's anywhere you go if you have dark skin. Anywhere you go in the world. So don't take it personally, Nigerians. And I think I'd even said to the moderator that night, you need to take that up to a higher level and say, why are people with dark skin hated, period?
Exactly. Because that's happening. Go to India. Same thing. The war is on the dark-skinned Indians. Go to Saudi Arabia. The war is on the dark-skinned Saudi Arabians. Go to China. The war is on the Black Chinese. Go to the Aboriginal Australians. The war is on them. Same thing in South America. So again, we're seeing this white supremacy mentality has been spread throughout the entire world. That the lighter you are, the better you are. And even now, colorism is coming into the Black community.
Correct.
Now, where we're seeing the lighter skin versus the dark skinned Black woman, or the opportunities. There are more opportunities for lighter skinned women than dark skinned women. And this is causing a lot of friction within the diaspora as well. So we're seeing a lot of this happening around the world. I've been with this so long to understand that if the melanated people around the world understand that we are 75% of the globe, then we would truly understand the power of unity. In the 13th and 14th century, Dr. Ben and Dr. Henry Clark, they established that the time of the corruption of history started around the 13th, 14th, 15th century, where they started to have a different look of ancient Africa. Because if you go back and look at the Greeks, they always shouted out ancient Africa. Even the Greek oracle was considered to be a Black woman from Egypt. If you look up Zeus Amun, and then you go back to Egypt and you find out who is Amun Ra. Okay, so there was always a connection between the Greeks and the Romans. And then the Romans as well gave a lot of props to Egypt as well with a lot of their customs. So they weren't particularly civilizations that were racist. They were civilizations for Rome, for example, they based things off of Roman citizenship, not based off color. So if you even look in the Bible, you see when Paul spoke about his Roman citizenship, even though he was a Jew, and might I add that they said they thought that Paul was an Egyptian.
Right.
So that shows you that. I needed to add that. They thought Paul was an Egyptian stirring up fires in Jewish community. So clearly, Paul was a man of color.
Right.
But that also shows you that they didn't base things off of race particularly, because it was very clear that these were Caucasian people, the Romans, and the Jews knew that they were different from the Romans. And the Romans saw them as different people, whether it be from race or tradition or culture, whatever the case may be. So it's very interesting once you start to know that. Even the first church that was established was found in Ethiopia. You know, the very first church that was found in Ethiopia, a part of the Exumite kingdom.
Correct. See, folks, I told you we were going to get some education this morning. This interview is delivering exactly as I expected. So right there, so first church, Ethiopia. Keep going. Yes.
So the connections between the Bible and Black history is very strong. And when you look at how the most civilizations in Africa they were always very spiritual. And to this day, the Black church is very spiritual.
Correct.
Very, very, very spiritual. And if you go into a Catholic church, it's not the same. It's not the same spiritualism, right? When it comes to the white church and the Black church, because there is a difference, I need to mention that. You can see the difference. One is used more for political gain with the white church.
Correct.
Religion has been used as a way to force some sort of a religious influence or political system over the people. In the Black church, you see more, dancing, more singing, more joy, more spoken word, so to speak, right? So the spiritualness is in the Black church, right? Whereas in the white church or the Catholic church or the other churches that are more connected to Europeans are more or less, political.
Correct.
They're more or less political. So that's really the difference in the churches today. And it has been used as a tool to colonize, to truly control. But I don't think we should turn away from the Bible because of how it's been used.
Correct.
And I think we have to understand that that's what the scripture says, that many people will come in my name.
That's right.
Many people will come in my name, but he will turn away from me and say, I do not know you, but there's a lawlessness. So it's very clear that there would be corruption from within the actual church, so to speak.
That's absolutely right. And, I did pull up that. It's called The Bible is Black History, and the author is Dr. Theron, Theron D. Williams. Dr. Theron D. Williams. The book is The Bible is Black History, and exactly what you're talking about here. What's interesting to me is what you said a few minutes ago in terms of dark-skinned people, regardless of whatever ethnicity, but the fact that they have dark skin, like you said, makes up 75%. And yet we've allowed that other 10, 20, 25% to pull the hat trick on us.
Yeah. Well, 1% of the world, 1% of the world controls the finance of the world.
Correct.
So it's an even smaller percentage than that 25% that's actually controlling everything. The thing is, you in order for miseducation to continue, everybody has to be deceived. White, black, Chinese, Puerto Rican, everyone has to be deceived. In a lot of my seminars I find a lot of people of different races that are not African saying things as if, wow, how could this have happened? How could we have been? And they're upset that they've been bamboozled.
Right.
And I've said that is the beginning of your awakening.
Correct.
Because when you've been taught from a youth up that these people have had no contribution to the human story, then you have been led to believe that they have no value. They add no value to your life. They add no value to your life.
That is a key point.
Uh-huh.
It is a key point in terms of how because everything can be related one way to current events. That is the reason Derek Chauvin could keep his knee on George Floyd's neck like that, because to him, he doesn't matter.
Uh-huh.
That's why you get the big lie per se that's going on here with this nonsense. Because I posted this morning, this whole scenario to me that we're going through with the big lie and the GOP, so forth, is like the Wizard of Oz. And like you just said, that whole notion of being angry when you figure out you've been bamboozled, I am convinced that's what's going to happen with what's going on with Trump. I am. I'm just sorry. I could be wrong, but I'm convinced a whole lot of folks at some point are going to realize they've been bamboozled.
Yeah, yeah. And it's very key to note that Jane Elliott always says that we are one race, we are the human family. And I agree with that. I absolutely do agree that we are one people. We all have descended out of Africa, out of the Africa movement. Talked about by Professor Leakey and Mary Leakey, discovering Lucy's remains. And we have to get to that point. So even when speaking to people of different races, we have to get them to understand. To degrade Africa is to degrade your roots.
Correct.
It's to degrade your origin. There's no saying. My mother says, "Look at the tree branch growing so strong to hate his own roots."
Wow.
And this is what has happened with society. It didn't just start with the Trump. It started at the roots.
Correct.
And the roots is ancient Africa. So once we get everyone in the world to understand, and believe it or not, my brother, they do understand. Because when you go to Africa and you're on the tours, you're not going to see African Americans.
Correct.
You're going to see Caucasians, Chinese, Asians, and Indians, and Arabians. These are the people who are looking and scouting places in Africa to somewhat colonize. And China is taking over Africa as we speak right now. I mean, you go to the Congo, you'll see planes, 747 jet planes, flying in, no passport, my brother, and flying those resources right out there.
And, I'm glad you brought that because I was going to go there in terms of questioning, in terms of resources. Because years ago, there was a movie called Black Diamond. And still, in terms of the diamond mines and everything that are there, I mean, I was reading something the other day about your major jewelers are some of the biggest offenders. I won't call their names, but those of you, you know who the major jewelers are. But they are still raping that country to this day, and that continent for diamonds.
Yes. The coltan. Let's talk about coltan that we're allowed to even speak on these phones that are so heavy. It comes from the Congo. We could talk about 75% of the cocoa.
Right.
That comes from to the U.S. for chocolate, for coffee, for cocoa butter, for shea butter, whatever you want to, that comes from cocoa, the cocoa bean. There are people in Africa who have never even tasted chocolate.
Wow.
Or are digging these cocoa farms. Yeah.
Wow.
Because it's very sad. They don't have the ability to manufacture these raw materials. So they grow them and they ship them out. And they're sold back to Africa for 10 times the price that they were taken out of there for. So you have farmers who've never even eaten chocolate in Ghana right now.
Wow.
That are cocoa farmers. And it's very, very sad, the things that are happening. This is the richest continent resource-wise.
Yes.
And yet it's being drained.
Yes.
Being drained.
And so to that sister that was on Clubhouse last night, yes, we could be descended from a cocoa farmer. Yes, we could. But again, that's not the point of it. And again, in terms of resource, because back to this whole miseducation thing, you just said that's the richest resource continent on the planet, which it is. But from a media standpoint, and there's a YouTube video of a young lady. She's about 13, 14, maybe that at the time. And what she was saying in her video was every time she goes to try to find images of Africa, it's always of them being poor or in poverty.
Yeah.
And she goes on to say, that's not the case. That's not how it is over here. Yet that's what's perpetuated to the world. And I think we talked about this on the phone that day when we chatted, or it might even have been in that clubhouse. I'm not sure. But the U.S. media is doing the reverse in terms of blacks in the U.S. because folks in Africa look at us and think the only thing we do is the only thing we are thugs. The only thing we do is kill. The only thing we do is steal. So now they're looking at the blacks in the United States and saying, well, all they do is kill and steal. And the blacks here are looking at the images from Africa and say, well, all of them are poor.
Yep. And media has controlled, and colorism is rising as well, same way through the media. So at one point, you couldn't even get a media job if you weren't a light-skinned woman or a light-skinned man. So that causes the house Negro and the field Negro mentality, right? So the media has pushed, again, who's controlling the media in Africa? We have to ask that question.
Correct.
Doing interviews in Africa and speaking to some of the media personalities, the people who I had to go through to get interviews, they're not African. Most of them are not in Africa or even stationed in Africa.
Wow.
So in Africa, their media is not being controlled. I'm not going to say some media. Their mass media, the media that gets out to the world, is not being controlled by Africans. Okay, so let's make that very, very clear. So the image that they're seeing of African Americans is a very negative one.
Right.
And it's just the same here. The image that we see of Africans here in America is the worst part of Africa. We see the flies flying around their heads,
right?
Poverty,
right?
We see no civilization. We see mud huts. We see violence, civil unrest. We see AIDS. We see Ebola. This is what we're seeing on the African continent from the media that's feeding us. It's not telling us the rich, beautiful history that we saw in Black Panther, which was a gem. It was a gem. It was a gem dropped by Stan Lee to let us know that we learned a lot of things from Africa, but you don't want to believe it. See, Stan Lee was, even though his comic book was fiction, right?
Right.
It has some proof to it.
Correct.
In the 13th century, there was a man called Mansa Musa. I'm sure that everybody enlightened has heard of Mansa Musa. But if you haven't, you're going to know today Mansa Musa was the richest man in the world.
That's correct.
He traveled to Mecca and went through Egypt and gave over $12 million in gold that I believe it took over 15, 20 years to pay Mali back from what Egypt had inherited from him. But when he made this great pilgrimage, giving away so much gold with over 100,000 warriors and soldiers, news got out. Publications were made about this rich man in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, keep this in mind. The Greeks and the Romans, particularly, or Europe, did not particularly know about what was happening in what they call today sub-Saharan Africa.
Correct.
They knew mostly about Kush and Egypt, particularly. Those were the mega civilizations that were closer to Europe that they knew about. But they didn't really know what was going on in Central and South Africa or West Africa like that. Because, again, they hadn't circumnavigated, Africa until the late 14th century.
Right.
So now, when we get to that point, we understand that when he made this pilgrimage and all these publications came out about this rich black man in this place called Mali, there were mercenaries that started to be sent out. Mercenaries who, we know today, Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci, Christopher Columbus,
right.
All of these mercenaries start to be sent out to find out and discover what's happening in places like Africa and places like India, looking for gold, particularly.
Right.
And this is when, obviously, the 14th century came down to the colonization that happened in the Americas and what happened in Africa in the 18th century. So, again, these things became known because of Mansa Musa's generosity, so to speak, giving away so much gold that they became aware of the rich resources that were in what they call sub-Saharan Africa today.
So let me put this in context for you, and I think the listening audience. Mansa Musa, put it this way. Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett had nothing on Mansa Musa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for as rich as they are in these times, does not compare to Mansa Musa in those times.
Not even close. Not even close.
Right. That's why I'm making this point. I'm trying to get folks to connect some things here. We sing the praises of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and whenever Steve Jobs and was alive and all, but the wealth doesn't come as you just heard Emmanuel say, it doesn't come close. And yet I would challenge you to look in any curriculum, anybody's history book in anybody's school and see if you find Mansa Musa in there.
Mm-hmm. Now, they got him in the National Geographic as a white man in 1965.
What's
1965 edition.
But see, and that brings up another point. Even in terms of representation in movies and films, when you start talking like the Ten Commandments, you start talking Cleopatra, when they're cast as Caucasians.
Mm-hmm. And it's not by accident. Because every film has a casting director. For everyone who doesn't know about film, the casting director their job is to research and search for the cast who are going to. So when you have movies like Gods of Egypt and movies like Exodus that has Christian Bale portraying Moses, understand, or a white man as a ruling elite and all the black people represented as slaves. And what they also forgot when they had black people represented as slaves, they forgot that the Hebrews were slaves at that time. So that's something that they forgot to include. Need I throw that out there? But they didn't do that by accident. That wasn't done by accident. That was to make it seem as if what happened here in America happened in ancient times as well, and that just wasn't the case.
No, well, I mean, you're talking Cleopatra, you're talking Nefertiti, you're talking Ramses, you're talking all these folks that we know. Well, again, those of us who read and study, we know they were not Caucasian. And yet, again, going back to that lady, I believe it because I saw it on TV. They know that there's a sadly a large percentage of all you got to do is put it on TV and folks are going to believe it. Okay. Yep. So if now I'm watching a movie and that's who I see cast in those parts, because Charlton Heston played Moses in Ten Commandments. Yul Brynner played Pharaoh, and on down the line. If I'm watching that, that's the characterization that is now in my mind. And then now when someone like me and Emmanuel comes at you and say, nope, that's incorrect. Now you want to argue, fight, debate, and hate.
Elizabeth Taylor, Cleopatra.
Correct.
I mean, they're trying to come up with a new Cleopatra film with Gal Gadot, who played Wonder Woman, to be Cleopatra. And it was a big uproar, not just from the Black community, but there are many. I want to shout out to my allies out there with Vanessa Davies, Dr. Shallyanne Ashton, Dr. Solange Ashby, Dr. Kayata. There are a lot of people doing this work, speaking against these white supremacist curriculum that has force-fed Africa in it from a European context.
Right.
We cannot continue to see African civilization from a European context. You know, Sheikh Anta Diop worked very hard to try to show the African origins of ancient Egypt, the beginning of Black civilization, of human civilization. And he was debunked and considered to be what they call Afrocentric, which is like a demonized term they use on Black scholars to say you have no credibility. What you're saying is just pseudoscience.
Bingo. Back to what you said earlier. You don't matter. Your contributions don't matter. I mean, it's all connected. And you're right in terms of, yes. And so, I mean, I have like down at Temple University, I got Dr. Molete Kefe Asante. He's Afrocentric. Matter of fact, he's written the book Afrocentricity. I have a lot of close friends that have done work in that area, and you're absolutely right in terms of the demonization of that term. That's why I use it frequently. Because you demonize it.
Afrocentric. I mean, Afrocentric is just accepting your African roots.
Correct.
The world we really want to get the entire world to have that mentality because we all originate there. The entire world originates there. You may have went further north or went further east or whatever the case may be, and your melanin might have lost over time, but you are still originally from the African continent. And to degrade the African continent is to degrade your own roots as a human society.
That's correct. I mean, and that's the message that everybody needs to understand because, one, they don't want to acknowledge the connection. That's one. But at the same time, and I've said this on the air before, in terms of schizophrenia, there are people, and I love all people, I really do, and this is not about bashing one group or the other. If anything, it's trying to uplift, so everybody is uplifted. But the thing that's always amazed me in terms of the schizophrenia is, as I said earlier, in terms of the stealing of the culture, the stealing of the artifacts, the stealing of the, of things that were from Africa, and then not acknowledging. But at the same time, the thing that you hate is what, whenever someone compliments you on, you just fall all over yourself. And I tell folks all the time, one of the biggest compliments you can give a Caucasian female for the most part is when they get a tan. And if you compliment that tan, they go crazy. I said, but wait a minute. That's supposed to be what it is that you all are hating, is the darker skin. That's, I mean, if you look back in our history in terms of the slave women breastfeeding Caucasian babies, wait a minute. How are you going to let something that you hate breastfeed your child? Okay, when you look back at the slave master raping the African women, wait a minute, how are you going to now sleep with and rape and something that you, that's the schizophrenia to me. And I think, what's his name? Dre did a wonderful video about, do you love me? And in the video, he gets into how the culture is, you love our culture. You love what we do, how we move, our dance, or this and that, but you don't really love me as a human being. Back to what you were saying, you don't matter.
Yeah, it's one of those things where this is why I do like Clubhouse. I mean, there is a lot of toxicity on Clubhouse, but I do like the fact that people are now having these conversations. People of all races are having the conversations on anti-blackness, racism, colorism. They're having these conversations. Now, I would not advise anyone to just go into any of these groups and join these debates because they're not very quality. They're not beneficial. But I will say that the conversations are being had. At one point, people they were just dealing with it. Black women in their hair. This was a huge problem in the work field. How Black women had to, alter their hair to look Caucasian in order to be accepted in the work in the workforce. So these are things that are happening, but the conversations are open up, and we have to, instead of dividing, we have to now go to film companies and say, are you really about diverse communities?
Correct.
If you're really about diverse communities, let's make an ancient African film. Let's show Africa in a positive light, not just a fiction one like Black Panther. Let's show a real historical African story. Let's talk about Mansa Musa. Let's talk about the real ancient Egypt. Let's talk about Abyssinia. Let's talk about Zululand. Let's talk about the real Hannibal Barca, because we could talk about Hannibal, how he was whitewashed as well. We can talk about how about these African queens who were the first women to ever rule? Now, when people always ask me, Black women, they're so strong. Why, even the medical science, they say that Black people are just stronger. So that's why they've used Black people as hosts for a lot of these
experiments.
That's
absolutely right. I mean, when you get into like the gynecological instruments that were developed, the doctor or the scientist or whatever he was, he designed, created, tested those on the slave women and the reasoning was they had a higher tolerance for pain. Now that's crazy. Mm-hmm. You're down there in somebody's genitals, cutting them up and carrying on and talking about, I'm doing that with them because they have a higher tolerance for pain.
Mm-hmm. We could go right to the Tuskegee experiment.
That's why folks are struggling with the vaccination today. That's why folks are, to this very minute, particularly African Americans, are struggling with taking the vaccination, is because of that. The Tuskegee experiment and others. And I pulled up on YouTube, Dr. Dre, the title of it is Beats by Dr. Dre, and the upshot is, you love Black culture, but do you love me? That's the question. That's the essential question of the video. Matter of fact, I came upon that during football season. It was one of the games, and it came on as a commercial. And it was a long commercial. Like I'm looking here on YouTube, it's 2 minutes and 1 second. And I believe the first time they showed it, they showed all 2 minutes of it. And I was looking like I almost fell off the seat. Like, whoa. So to your point of conversation being had, and people are waiting. I'll give people credit where credit is due, because everybody is not shutting themselves off. There are people that really do want to know more, and they are embracing, as you say, the history. And you're right. It is time for us to build and to unify and to stop segregating and tearing each other apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things where we've taken on this crabs in the barrel mentality, to where, we have to pull each other down. We have to debate Al Green and Marvin Gaye. We have to debate Michael Jackson and Prince. We have to debate Tupac and Biggie. We have to debate Michael Jordan and LeBron James. There can be many kings. You have to debate Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali. There doesn't have to be one.
Right.
And if you look at the other communities, you don't see Chinese doing that. You don't see Jackie Chan versus Bruce Lee.
Right.
You don't see, you don't see, Christopher Columbus versus Amerigo Vespucci. You don't see that. These are things that has been put on us to continue through media.
Right.
Media is, Tupac, he understood one thing. Dying at a young age, he understood before he passed away how powerful the media was. And he used the media to be a tool to get his message out there.
Correct.
He was one of the first hip hop artists to really do that on that level, to where he was like a walking social media, you know. And every time, Tupac news. And if you look at today, everybody got a Tupac story. Muhammad Ali did the same thing.
Right.
Michael Jackson did the same thing.
Correct.
They understood the power of the media. And shout out to Michael Jackson, because do you remember the time was the first time we saw Black Egyptians.
That's right. That's correct.
Eddie Murphy. And keep this in mind, brother, too. He had to personally fund that himself, because the music company did not want to. I challenge everybody to look this up. They did not want to support that music video, which ended up being a classic music video.
It always
Shout
does.
out to Michael Jackson.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And see, I mean, we could talk for hours, and our time is beginning to run out. But you just brought up another point, which is what happened, because Black Panther did the same. Black Panther was the highest grossing of all the Marvel characters. It turned out that Black Panther wound up being the highest grossing. And what is Black Panther about? Africa. Black people. Same point that you just mentioned. The company didn't want to fund it, and yet Michael funded it, put it in there, and it wound up being the top. That's usually the pattern. The very thing that you're trying to deny winds up being the top. And I think that's part of the intentionality of trying to suppress and keep it down to, because I'm convinced that folks know once we have something, we got it, and we're going to tear it out the park. Whether it's right. And I believe folks know that.
Yes, they know it, because there was a study done for $250 billion that Hollywood is leaving on the table not to promote Black films. We have the history with Shaka Zulu. We have the history with Roots. But Shaka Zulu was the most watched television series of all time up until 1997.
Correct.
It's not stuff that you know. Black Panther, as you just mentioned, you know, what it sold. When you talk about Black history, it's all when there's movies that come out like that, they know they're going to do well. The point is, what is it going to do to the people?
Right.
Is it going to change their view of ancient Africa? Is it going to change their view of Africans, period? And that is what the media does not want to happen. So I challenge everyone, if you're in these industries, okay, the music industry, the film industry, the media industry, to start to put these CEOs, their feet to the fire. It's not just about a Black commercial. It's about changing what has been done. So when you sit in these times and you have a meeting with these guys, what can we do to magnify Black history? Talk about real diversity and inclusion, and start putting these CEOs feet to the fire to show that they're really inclusive.
No, you're absolutely right, and this is truly going to be the last example I'm going to give, and then I'm going to give you the mic to promote. But years ago, when Denzel and Haley, when they won the Oscar or the Academy, whichever one it was, I always get them confused. Folks, they were so glad and giddy and thrilled, and I was not. And they asked me why. I said, because you got to look at the bigger picture in terms of what they won the awards for. Denzel, now, this is the thing. Both of those, the actor and actress, had played much more powerful and significant roles. They had. I mean, you had Denzel with the story he played about the soldier. You had Denzel played Malcolm X. You had Haley, who played Dorothy Dandridge and played Losing Isaiah. And I mean, they had some really significant roles. They did not win awards for those yet. Denzel now plays a rogue cop, and Haley strips down in Monsters Ball. That's what they win awards for. I said, don't you understand the messaging in that? As long as you be in a hood, as long as you in the hood, or you a thug, or you a hooker, or a hoe, we're going to award you for that. But if you're doing something significant like in Glory or X, or like you just said, we know it's going to be good, but what message does it send to the people? So that's why when I told folks, I said, I wasn't happy about that at all. And they said, you think too deep. I said, no, you don't think deep enough. So, look, the institution, back to what you said. Do you all really want to be diverse, or do you just want to put folks that look like us in front of us?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's time to, this is a time where America has seen it as it was. When the incident happened with Emmanuel, there was always still speculation about how it actually happened, right? But they saw what happened to George Floyd live on TV.
Right.
They're seeing it now. They're seeing it as it is. It is no longer this myth, because you'll be very surprised how many communities, how many suburban communities would say, well, you guys been freed since the Emancipation Proclamation, and you should be happy now. You got what you want. You got affirmative action. You got this. You got that. But they still don't understand systematic oppression. They still don't understand that there are more black people locked up in prison in America than there are people in Equatorial Guinea.
Correct.
I'll say that again. There are more black American men in prison than there are people in Equatorial Guinea, a country. So if that doesn't change what people's mentality is towards what's happening to blacks in this country, I don't know what will.
Again, it goes back, and I'm going to let you promote in a minute, but it goes back to what we said at the top of the show. There's one thing to not know. There's another thing I don't want to know. And so to that point you just made, there are a lot out there who don't want to know. And that's why they're not moving any further. Because once we get to that point, like the conversations you were talking about, those folks want to know. The folks that are joining in these various conversations and having these conversations, there is a little something there, at least an inkling of curiosity. Then you have those who don't care at all, who will write laws that say you as a parent can opt your child out of the Black history curriculum.
Yep.
So with that being said, we have now come down, and man, does the time, I'm telling you, the time fly. I'm going to have you back.
Yeah, man.
This is the opportunity for you to promote. You could say anything with the exception of a dollar amount, any websites that you want to promote, anybody you want to shout out, the 2 books, because the second book is about to drop, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could talk about Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power. And then in terms of the new one that's coming up, you can do all that. The only thing you can't say is dollars price. But contact information, everything else, this is your opportunity to promote.
All right. So thank you for this opportunity, brother. This has been a real treat, by the way. And, I just want to tell everybody, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power is out. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. You can get it right now. Empowering. It's a historical fiction portraying the true African imagery of ancient Egypt. It is a story about the rise of the Queen Pharaoh Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III, the greatest Egyptian conqueror that ever lived. A great epic story of epic battles, fast-paced. You would absolutely love it. Great cultural history, everything that you can imagine in a story of Egyptian history. You have cultures, you have triumph, you have war, you have debates, you have a little scandal. Everything is in this novel. Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph will be releasing with Kemet Publications. Shout out to Kemet Publications for having the courage to take this project on, knowing that it was very controversial. But Golden Age of Triumph, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph will be releasing May 30th, 2021. So make sure you look out for that. You can sign up for that on iblackpharaoh.com, and there's a contact section. Just type in your name, your information, and pre-order, and we will send the pre-order information to you. As well, we're looking to transform this into a film. That is the ultimate goal. So shout out to Renee Thompson and Thomas Duran for working with me to get this script written. And we're going to put pressure on these film companies to show, are you really inclusive about showing the true diversity of ancient Africa and of Black people around the world, their history. So I have that going. I also have created Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America, which will give us the opportunity to travel to the African continent once we come out of this pandemic to, we're currently we will be doing virtual tours. So you can also sign up for that at blackpharaoh.com if you're interested in that, doing those different things, to return to the motherland to find out if what you have saw on TV is actually the truth. So my goal is to do all 55. I have not done all 55 countries on the continent of Africa. It's a lot of history there that even I myself am still learning, and I'm sure many of you would like to learn as well. So that's what we're going to be doing with that. We're also going to be going to other areas as well to discover what's happened with Africans' contribution to the Americas, the African contribution to Asia. So we'll also, Europe as well, be traveling to those places. And lastly is media. I have formed a coalition of media personalities we have formed IBP Media, which is International Broadcasting Programming, which our goal is to connect all people throughout the world of diverse communities to each other because of this Western media promotion of these areas. So currently we have a host in India, we have a host in Egypt, we have a host in South Africa, and we have one as well in Guyana. We have 2 in the United States. So we're looking to launch that starting June 1st. So look out for IBP Media Group, look out for I Black Pharaoh Golden Age of Triumph, and of course, Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America, which will be bringing all of those things together with education, with travel, with media, with films, and with literature, which all have been diluted. So those are my goals that I'm going to be attacking in the next few years.
Well, I tell you what, God bless you, man, and I applaud you. If anything I can do in terms of getting the word out, please let me know. I'm going to get you back on here so we can talk some more. But again, it is so important. Like I said, every platform that I have, whether it's in writing, whether it's verbal, whether it's in person, every platform I have, I am pushing that message and sharing that message with folks, because we really need to understand it. Because for me, I have no shame in my game of saying I'm a proud Black man. I'm a proud Black king. I have no shame in saying that at all. And so,
and you're doing great work too, brother. I've been watching what you've been doing. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, because it's needed. It's needed, my brother, that we connect to our roots. It's so needed. And so many scholars have, Ivan Van Sertima, Cheka de NTD, Dr. Ben, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, so many have died trying to get this message out there.
Yes.
Trying to get our truth out there. And it's good that we're keeping that fight going. And it's worth it, even if we go biblical.
No, absolutely.
Jesus died for truth. Jesus died for truth.
That's right. It is worth it. No question is worth it. So again, I thank you. We're going to stay in touch. Again, we're going to set another date for you to come back so we can talk some more. I actually downloaded your book last night, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power. I downloaded it on my Kindle. So I'm going to start reading that as well. But again, the book is Black Pharaoh. And Emmanuel made it very clear that Black was not necessarily talking about skin color. He was talking about it was in Egypt. That means completion. Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power. And the second one that's coming is Black Pharaoh,
Golden Age of Triumph.
Golden Age of Triumph. Okay, there we go. All right. And, see, like I said, every time you say something, man, it takes me off to another thought, because that's the other thing. This is the last thing for sure. I said that before, but, this truly is we as Africans, we as Black people need to start talking victoriously. We need to stop the victim thing. We need to, slavery was what it was, but that's not our only story. That's why we had this conversation this morning. And that's why I made the statement I made on Clubhouse in terms of us being descended from kings and queens. We need to talk victoriously.
Yes. My father told me one thing, and I'll leave you on this note, my brother. He told me this as a child. What is 400 years of slavery compared to 3,000 plus years of royalty? And that is what I would like to share to the diaspora around the world, to empower yourself on your rich royalty.
There you go. And I couldn't think of closing any better than that. Matter of fact, I'm going to try to say it like you said it, but I think you might have to say it again so I don't mess it up. But what Emmanuel just said was, what is 400 years of slavery compared to 4,000 years of royalty?
Yep.
That's a wonderful stop point right there. Man, you have a good day. Thank you again.
Thank you, my brother.
All right,
Enjoy
take care.
Yep, take care.